Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, and thank you for stopping by again. Been a while since I've been here. A lot has happened. A number of statistics suddenly started rolling out. The National Institute for Statistics and the Census is responsible for all our financial and any statistics coming from the government, has been swamped. Of course, there's a lot of work getting these statistics together during a time of pandemic, and then getting the reports done and feeling that they're accurate and getting them out. I think the Institute does a very good job, but I know they have really been hurting from the pile of work built up. Now that's coming out, and that's very interesting, and I'm going through it all. It's slowing me down a little bit because I need to go through and see if there's anything important that needs to be shared and so on. In the process of doing this, there was a rumor, word had come that they were talking about changing the entry requirements for people coming into the country vis-a-vis testing. And of course, that's big news. I mean, that's something I really wanted to hear the details on. And they did come through with an article a week or so ago, saying yes, they were giving serious consideration, or they didn't really say, the proposal, let's put it that way, the proposal was to allow people in who had been fully vaccinated, the two doses. I would assume one dose for the Johnson & Johnson. But in any event, if they had, and they showed evidence of that, they would not be required to have a test result with a negative result. That would be great. I mean, that was a huge step forward. Now, since then, I, of course, patiently waiting for the details, because that's where the really important information is, and they have not been forthcoming. I don't think this is going to happen immediately, and for a number of reasons. I could be wrong. I mean, they're so conservative here in the Ministry of Health. I'm not sure. I don't expect anything dramatic overnight. But one of the things we want to get done is as many people as possible vaccinated here. And that's going to take a little while to do that. But we're trying to get at least the vulnerable population out of the way. And a great deal of effort has been put into that. Now, we were one of the first, along with Chile. At the very beginning, we were praised for getting in line for ordering the vaccines right up front as quickly as we knew they were going to be necessary. Naturally, we were not the first to receive the vaccine. It's been very frustrating. And the distribution of vaccine has just been really crazy all over the world. So we only got a small quantity, and we got that late. And then Pfizer, in this case, started rolling out with much more, and things took off. I think the most important thing, as far as I'm concerned, is that we had time to prepare, and we were prepared. I was very much impressed with the way it unfolded. I have had my first dose. I'll have my second one coming up here in another 10 days or whatever, 2 weeks. And it was just extraordinarily well done. I had no problem getting through it. It was very quick. Once I was, in the proper room. Very friendly people. Had someone come in who did not speak more than a few words of Spanish, there would have been no problem. They have, if anything, they had it overstaffed. They've really gone out of their way to have this as thoroughly staffed as possible. And the folks there might have had a little trouble with their English pronunciation and so forth, but they would have understood any problem you had. Everybody was incredibly supportive. I just thought it was well done all the way around. And I check that from time to time when I speak in English to see what happens, because I'm thinking in terms of you. But then, I handle it in Spanish. This is very easy, and you will probably be able to do it yourself if you've taken a little work, if you're ever in the need of the injections. Anyway, that's been happening, and late though we were in getting started, we are making substantial progress, and I'm going to throw a chart up here, and it will show. Wow. Well, if you see way over on the far right here, that's the latest I had. I think that's actually the 20th, or the 19th or 20th of March when that was done. That Panama is at the top of the list. And you follow that line down, and you see we were definitely not at the top of the list just a matter of a few weeks ago. And you can see how very dramatically we rose once we got our hold of these things. And this is testimony to how well prepared the system was when the time finally came. And this is already out of date. So more had been done, more will be done. I mean, we're steaming along. Now, Our purpose is we're now to the 60 and over crowd. Okay? We've gotten the people who need the for health reasons of their own, they need to have it, and those who are security forces, of course, all the health system people who are come in contact with people who have the disease. Everybody's been dealt with there, and now we're dealing after that with normal people, and of course the 60 and up group is the very first of those to get touched, and we are getting good responses. We're going to need, they say, 70 to 80% coverage in order to have herd immunity to the extent there is any. The first couple districts, they're doing it by legislative district, a little bit different than other ways that I've mentioned before, a different way of looking at the city and the nation. The first was out in a working class, lower middle income area with some gentrification going on, but it's basically a working class area. We've had 70% there, and that's very good since many of the people are not on the internet. And the internet, the portal where we all sign up for things, it's worked like a charm. It's just been great. And when it was time for me to go in, they sent me my notification. They told me exactly where to go. They gave me a map and so forth. So if you don't have that, though, people have to go out and find you. You have door to door, and that's been happening. You go to churches and other groups to get to them. So 70% is pretty darn good for right off the bat. The next group happened to be the legislative district that I'm in, and it's very interesting. Like the others, they're really doing it for it to be as successful and comfortable as possible for people. And our district is not a large district because it's got a fairly substantial population, so it's not that big and holds its necessary allotment. They had 14 places set up to deliver the vaccine. Each of us was assigned to one or another site, so we weren't all being sent to the same one. Or we weren't just sort of having to choose or whatever. I knew exactly where to go. I could have walked there, but as it was, it was a busy day. For $2, I was there in an Uber and walked right in. The nice thing about it is it gave people of all backgrounds, whatever, they could walk, they could take a bus, they could take a very inexpensive this would be about 35 cents, and then or an Uber, cheap Uber, whatever their heart's desired, or drive or a friend drive them over, and so forth, and what have you. Not a big deal. And when they get there, it's so well set up that you get right through it. We had 86% coverage in our legislative district because most of these people are on internet. They can go to the portal, they can get everything set up in advance, and when you walk in, I mean, they have the list and you're there, and everything works. That's the important thing. So as you see on that chart, we're moving right along up, and we're only around 7.5% or whatever of the total population, but probably a substantial, well, we are not probably, at a substantially higher proportion of those who are particularly critical to have it. We are a younger society compared to many of yours, so the over 60 group is not as large a proportion of the total as it is in many North American and European countries. So, it's within reason that we get to a point where we can begin to feel a little more comfortable with letting people in. So that's one area that has to be considered. And so then we're not quite at that. We're not at that point. I don't think the health folks would think we were. The other problem, of course, is the great nightmare. We have Brazil's gone bonkers down there. Their variant is nasty because it's so rapid. It has now been, as I read today, been found in Uruguay. Well, I'm not too surprised. It's right next door, but we do business with Brazil. Now we can do most of that by Zoom, or whatever, because it's primarily them. And this at this point in time, shipping through the canal, and that does not require that we have hands-on contact with each other. But there are a lot of Brazilians coming up here for business normally, so we have insisted on their being tested up until now, and that's obviously going to have to continue. The UK, the United Kingdom, and South Africa, they're still dealing with their variants. And they still, as far as last I heard, neither group was allowed into the country yet. That will come when we get to a point where we feel it's safe. We're very concerned about the European Union because so many places now seem to be sinking into yet another wave. And again, the variants are the problem child there. And likewise in the United States, which is a confusing system, and so it's hard to know who's where and so forth, what's happening where. But at the moment, we also see the beginnings of the variant moving up there. And this is our primary concern. It's this race that we're in to get ourselves to a point that variant or no variant, we are as protected as we're going to be. But we can't do it to our folks. We can't tell them. I mean, people follow this. I don't think we're a bunch of little ignorant people who don't know what's going on. They're nonsense. Television, radio, talk shows, and newspapers, everything under the sun. Plus your neighbors and everybody in your office, and everybody else is talking about it. So people don't want to think that we're letting the guards down too much to bring in people that might hurt them. And that makes perfectly good sense. So when that begins to clarify itself, and let's hope that it gets brought under control, or that we get our vaccination up really fast, and that's a challenge. But if we can get this to a point where we can now institute this new system, and maybe we're going to be able to do that even with the variant, depending on how recent the vaccinations were taken and all this stuff. So there's hope. There's hope. It's not as nice as if it was subsiding everywhere. Here, it's definitely subsided. I mean, we've just very few cases, fewer, hardly any deaths. We're under 100 cases, I believe, on a pretty steady basis now. We have the Easter week coming up, and that we expect there'll be a spike. People have been asked to use their heads and not get carried away here. And we hope that's the case. We already have people heading out to the beaches. Those are covered pretty thoroughly by security to be sure we don't have any problems there. We haven't to any great extent that I've heard of, at least. So we're moving. We're doing fine in that respect, and that's a happy thing to share with you. Now, real estate. I'm going to have a little bit more to talk to you about. Maybe have somebody on who's just been through it recently. We'll see how he gets through it. He's in the midst of it. We've had people working with the Metro Mass program here, and he is one of those. And we'll see how that works out, and maybe he can talk to us about his experience. He's made an offer. Let's see what happens. You never know. So no promises until we get this. Until I hear from him. By the way, he is the gentleman, Ed, who is responsible. All right, I'll say his name. It's Ed Tennis, and he's from the great state of Missouri in the United States of America. And he provided the photograph you saw as you came to this video. It's out, the first thing you see before you click on it and it starts rolling. That's a city. He gotten back. He'd been stuck all winter in the U.S. because of the pandemic, if you can imagine, and he finally had gotten back here. And one of the first things he did was he went down to take a walk along the bay, and he took that photo. So he sent it on to me, and I'm sharing it with you, and it's very kind. And thank you, Ed, for doing that. And perhaps we'll get a chance to talk to you in the not-too-distant future about your adventures here and yet finding another place to live. He already has gone through this once, and he's now looking for maybe even a better deal. So we'll see what happens. And there are deals. Oh, my Lord, yes. But you really do. It's a back and forth. It's a back and forth situation. Because nobody, including the sellers, has really accurate information on what's going on in terms of sales. And everyone's sort of trying to feel their way through it. So that makes it a little more complicated, but that's the way it is. And we're just going to have to deal with that until things sort themselves out a little bit more. I was about to close down and realized I hadn't said something I did want to add in. It'll only take a few minutes, so here it goes. I had warned people, and not too long ago, that there are people in the business down here who are trying to attract people into the country, and particularly with real estate, on political grounds. In other words, if you're American particularly, or if you're from Europe now, as a growing number of them, they try to determine what your politics are, and then they frame everything in that light and try to get you to a point of buying. sometimes it's just, well, I think it's unethical. I mean, it's just, I don't like it. I don't like that sort of manipulation. A lot of people here agree with me, but there are nonetheless people who do it, and they do it very, very convincingly, even though it's not a word of it's true, necessarily. So, what's the problem, basically? They go too far sometimes. And that's one of our folks who had stopped by, and he got hold of me and said, could we meet and talk? I said, of course. So I went over and we had a nice meeting. And then later he dropped me an email and he said, you know, Bob, I forgot to ask you about one thing. I have heard that Panama is going to issue its own currency and backed up by gold. Is that the case? And what do you say about it? And I said, no, I can make this very short. No, we're not doing that. The thought hasn't entered anyone's mind. It's not going to happen. The Panamanians have had 117 years of experience with the dollar and many opportunities to drop it and never have, and have no intentions of starting. They know very well what happened with other Latin American countries that got hold of their own currency, and then the printing presses started to roll. And they don't care what you may think of, fears that you may have about inflation with the dollar. They've been through scares of that sort before in the past too. You have nothing, and I can assure you this from experience, compared to what has gone on in some Latin American countries. So the simple fact of the matter is that now there is no such interest, and if you would announce something like that in the press here, you would be slammed so fast, people wouldn't believe you would think you were out of your mind. It's just, no. But might add, backed by gold? What gold? We don't have any in our foreign reserves, and we produce very little, and we produce copper. It's not the same thing. So that whole thing is just silly, but what really brings it home is that we're unusual in one sense. I don't know, maybe there's another country like this, but the Constitution here in Panama specifically forbids the government from creating its own fiat currency or legal tender. Specifically, there's one sentence. It's Article 262 in the Convention. It's one section long, and basically it says that the Republic, they will have no currency here, curso forzoso, no paper currency. And curso forzoso is the basic idea here is legal tender or fiat currency, something of that sort. They forbid it. Now, they say paper money because we use American coins just like anybody else in the U.S., but we also have coins down here. Panama mints its own because it's just ridiculous to have an extra half ton of pennies sent down here. You know, just absurd. So the coins they are allowed to bring out in Balboa units or portions of a Balboa. And we have to call it something because we can't call it the U.S. dollar. We can't call it 50 American cents because it isn't. It's going to be 50 centimos, 50 cents in Spanish, and it's perfectly legitimate. They're totally exchangeable. We use them all the time. Nobody makes any differentiation in them at all. By the same thing, if you're going to leave the country and you don't plan on coming back, you can pretty much give your Panamanian Balboa coins to anybody, and they'll trade them for American. They'll have them, and of course, they carry them too. They'll trade with you. They're meaningless. I mean, they're perfectly the same. Now, so absolutely, in order to have our own currency, there would have to be an amendment to the Constitution. Don't expect that anytime soon. This whole thing is silly. That doesn't mean, now, in terms of the dollar otherwise, it doesn't mean that we have to use the dollar for financial purposes. We're not required to use the dollar. We're just, I say we, I mean the country is just forbidden to make its own currency, but it isn't required to use the U.S. dollar. If that should happen to fall apart and everybody wants cryptocurrencies or Swiss francs or whatever, or Singapore dollars, make any difference, then all right, if you want to go through the canal, that's what you will pay. Everybody on the planet will be making that transition. We'll make that transition. We have no problem with that at all. All right? No. It boils down to is that is not true. It is clearly being used with a purpose of attracting attention and positive vibes about Panama that are not legitimate. I mean, there are many good reasons to come here that have made many people happy, but that is not one of them, and I'm sorry. So if you hear that, I wouldn't listen to that person or that website. They certainly don't know what they're talking about in this case, as far as I'm concerned. All right. Thank you very much. Sorry to have to add that on at the end, but it's the way the world is these days. Good enough. Look forward to seeing you again.